It's so inclusive. To look at the stories of the day and the week ahead, I'm joined by my political panel, the Liberal Senator Holly Hughes, who's not afraid to stir the pot. That's why we love her. And the former Labor Senator Stephen Conroy, who was fortunate and wise enough to escape Canberra for a far more enjoyable and productive life here, setting the world to rights on Sky. Great to see you both. How are you both?
Nice to see you, Rowan. Nice to see you, Stephen.
Good to be with you both.
OK, the left's hypocrisy, Stephen, seems to be an ongoing theme this year. It's only June, and of course, leading the charge is none other than the Greens and their Aussie flag-loathing leader, Adam Bandt. His crusade for popularity and need for political zingers saw his refusal to accept the Energy Security Board's draft scheme to pay coal and gas generators for reliable power they supply. Instead, Climate King Bandt refused to support the scheme, saying it will only prolong the transition to renewables. But, Stephen, even your old mate Kevin Rudd had a crack at the Greens leader. What's going on? No love lost among the lovies, I note.
Well, look, I mean, Bandt is just baying at the moon. He had his heart set on being a minister in this government. He believed he would have leverage. He believed he would have enough votes that he could demand a cabinet spot for himself. And what you see now is his desperate cry for attention on any issue, whether it's the Australian flag, whether it's, you know, we've got to ban all fossil fuels, including gas. I mean, the country would be in a crisis of monumental proportions if we followed his advice. We've already just skated through by the skin of our teeth, so we didn't have serious blackouts across the country in the most freezing of conditions, and God knows what it would have been the consequences with those temperatures for particularly the elderly. But he is just going to do and say anything. You've got to remember the other thing he claims, it was a great election for the Greens. There were hundreds of thousands of climate voters who couldn't bring themselves to ever vote for the Greens. They're called the Teals. So, I mean, the Greens should have been potentially competitive and not the Teals in all of those seats. But those people are a bit too sensible for the Greens. They work out that they're actually, you know, the old watermelon, green on the outside, red in the yes. Red in the centre. So they've got no appeal whatsoever. So there are hundreds of thousands of climate active and activated people in this country who don't want to borrow the Greens. And he's got to try and make as much noise to try and convince people not to notice what happened in all those seats that they didn't win.
Holly, I mentioned earlier the protesters. We saw the girl bicycle chaining herself to steering wheel, blocking the tunnel, and some commuters weren't terribly thrilled. What do you think, Holly? Should we be getting tougher penalties here, or is this part of the democratic process? What do you think, Holly?
Look, I think it is both of those things. I do think that there should be much tougher penalties for it, because I think what we do see is the more these people pull these cheap stunts, the more inconvenience they cause people. And it's not about drawing attention to an issue. This is literally shutting down one of the biggest cities in the world, and certainly the largest city in the country. But I mean, I was interested looking at that vision. I noticed she had a water bottle that was not reusable. I wondered whether or not she was driving an EV.
Oh, I think we know the answer there. Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure, I mean, I got in trouble during the election after Albo made the point that people could use their solar panels to charge their EVs overnight, which, of course, when I pointed out the sun didn't shine at night, I was widely criticised with regards to not acknowledging batteries. Well, I'm more than aware of batteries, but I also know they tend to run out of power within 2 hours and then require more fossil fuels to recharge up. So I think at the moment we're still going round in circles with these ridiculous notions that people seem to think there's some renewable solution out there for every problem, and it just does not exist within the current technology.
Stephen, I want to talk about jobs crisis hitting Australia. I would argue it may well get worse under Labor. You may disagree. But what was interesting was this proposal. Funnily enough, I'm not sure what your thoughts on it are, but I, for one, was pushing this, and people here on Sky were, since well before the election, the idea that those people aged over 65 who wish to return to work be allowed to do so without losing their pension benefits. Scott Morrison didn't go for that, but now the Finance Minister, well, kind of saying yes or no. Just have a listen.
And we need to make sure that people are working where they can work. We've got severe labour shortages at the moment, so where sensible ideas are made, we'll certainly have a look at it. But also after after nearly a decade in government, if this was such a great idea, I wonder why it wasn't pursued by the government, the former government, when they were in power.
Actually, Stephen, I'll just go to Holly first because I'd just like her to answer that question. Why did the Morrison government not pursue what's an extremely sensible suggestion? And many people over 65 would love the chance to get back and do some extra work to meet people and so on, but they're penalised for doing so. Holly?
Look, I think it is a great idea. I do agree with it. And I think one of the reasons why it probably didn't come to the fore before the election was coming out of the pandemic, no one expected our unemployment rate to be the lowest in 48 years. And since we're now seeing these desperate labour shortages across the board, people do need to start looking at solutions and looking creatively at how we can fix it. I'd like to see people on the disability support pension to also be able to earn more money. We certainly know some people are capable of working more days than they are, but are very, very scared of losing the pension because some of them take an awful long time to get the jobs in the first place. So are concerned if they lose the job and have lost their pension, they won't be able to go back. So I think we do need to get creative. I don't think anyone was looking at unemployment figures and continually lowering unemployment figures and why we need to look at these things now. It's not about looking backwards, it's about looking forwards. But I do think it's a great idea and it is something that we should look at.
Stephen, I'd like your thoughts on that, as well as, I mean, I would argue that if you're going to go down that route, wouldn't you also, as former Senator Wacker Williams has suggested, if we really want to boost productivity, which is the name of the game, why not lower taxes, for example, on overtime as an incentive to get people to work longer, more productivity? What are your thoughts on this issue, Stephen?
Well, look, I think, when the facts change, if you stick to an old position, then you're starting to look pretty stupid. And I think the now opposition and government, and Holly's just made the point that, the circumstances have substantially changed. We have a crisis right now, and it's probably going to be around for maybe a year or two. So I can see a sort of sunset provision which encourages people who want to come back to work over 65 and not risk losing their pensions or their income streams. So I think that's a very reasonable suggestion and should be considered. I think ultimately this is a more macro issue. I think this is a good, worthy suggestion, but I think there's a bigger issue around our immigration intake going forward. And I think there'll be some very sensible discussions at the Jobs Summit that's coming up to want to ensure that we get the right mix of skills, the right increase in the number of migrants coming to our country. Because as we are seeing at the moment, we have an ability to not fill thousands and thousands of jobs. And the supply chains throughout the country are constantly being disrupted. Goods and services can't be provided. I mean, this is all down to the lack of the workforce. And, whether it's the international students coming back and filling in a lot of the positions. I mean, there's an enormous amount of international students that help fill these gaps. They've been locked out of the country, all the migration, plus this proposal. I think it's going to be a couple of years, but I think this is worthy.
Holly, just quickly want to ask you, Stephen mentioned Job Summit coming up later in the year. Obviously, Labor love this concept. The Bob Hawke Summits are famous for being successful, but what they were about was suppressing the unions and suppressing wage growths. The Kevin Rudd Summit, the 2020 so-called summit, well, Stephen might have fonder memories of it than I do, but it didn't seem to achieve a great deal.
I promise you I don't have fond memories of it.
OK, well, Holly first and then Stephen. Your thought? What about this Job Summit? Tell us, Holly, your thoughts.
Look, the Labor Party certainly does love summits on particular issues. I think, look, I don't have a total objection towards getting smart people in a room to throw ideas around. I hope that there is some sort of balance to it, that it's not a union-led talk fest and big employers and small and family businesses aren't ignored in this part of the conversation. We know Labor haven't had a real love affair with small and family businesses in the past, so I hope that they are part of the conversation. But more importantly, I hope that there is some solutions that come out of it, because we do have labour shortages at the moment. Again, Stephen, it's like we're on a Unity ticket tonight. We do need to make sure...
Let's see if we can change that.
I'm sure we can. But I agree with you on immigration.
Some other time, Stephen, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. But just quickly, Roe v. Wade is obviously the big decisions come out of... Most people don't seem to understand that all the US Supreme Court has done and say, well, hang on, this shouldn't have been in our place. We shouldn't have been discussing this, back to the states where it belongs. That's basically it. The states can have whatever abortion laws they want. They can have abortion as long as you want, or no abortion, or probably they'll all end up somewhere in between. Stephen, your thoughts on Roe v. Wade? Don't start screaming at the screen like the lady we saw earlier,
look,
but you can if you want to.
Yeah, no, look, a very disappointing decision, because what it allows is states now to ban abortions completely, and they've already indicated they're considering further steps. Some states have already introduced, they have the trigger ready to go. They've dropped it, so abortions are no longer available in a range of states, and more are likely to follow that path. They're also talking about, the people who are behind this, talking about access to contraception, the day after pill, a whole range.
But they specifically said they
forms.
weren't. Only Clarence Thomas has said that. They specifically said they weren't. But you're right. Clarence
Oh, no.
Thomas
I'm not
has
talking
said,
about the judges. I'm talking about the people
Sure.
who were behind pushing this position.
Clarence
They've
Thomas
got a
has said
very
we should be
broad
looking at
agenda.
same-sex marriage again. That's what Clarence Thomas has advised.
Yeah, it's like, this is extraordinary.
Yeah. Holly, your thoughts?
Well, I am having a look at this, and I've got a 15-year-old daughter who you can imagine is sort of looking at all of these sort of issues and trying to speak to me about them. And I was explaining to her that this wasn't about the substantive of abortion per se. It's more about federal overreach and states being able to legislate, but also the democratic process then within those states to have their own legislature decide how they're going to look at the abortion issue. I, sort of take the Bill Clinton line here that it should be safe, it should be rare, it should be legal. But I've been interested, amused, the total lack of awareness shown by some people, particularly if you look at the French President Emmanuel Macron came out condemning the decision, whereas this was Dobbs in Mississippi, which allows abortions to be performed up to 15 weeks. In France, it's only recently moved from 12 weeks to 14 weeks.
Exactly.
So France is actually more restrictive than Mississippi, than the state where this decision has actually emanated from. So I just don't
The
think...
hypocrisy of the left, Holly.
Look, I just don't think we want to go overboard where states
I don't know you can call
moving.
Macron a lefty.
Well, Macron's condemned the decision, yet abortions are more difficult to get in France
Just very quickly,
than
Stephen,
Mississippi.
We're going to run out of time, but just very quickly, because I couldn't resist it. I touched on the story last week about the Texas Republican Convention adopting a resolution during the state convention which rejected the results of the 2020 election. And there's a lengthy thing there explaining why they don't think Joe Biden is legitimate president. I thought you would love that. I thought that would make your week, actually. I can't wait to hear your thoughts.
No, look, those Texas Republicans, they're on another planet. I mean, Biden's not really the president, started the secessionist movement, kicked off wanting to pull out. I mean, the Texas Republicans, hopefully, Beto O'Rourke can win a ballot in Texas soon and just wash away these insane lunatics that don't believe in democracy, they don't believe in the rule of law, they don't believe in the peaceful transition of power. And those are fundamental core tenets that there's been a bipartisan support to do, and the Trump MAGA movement just don't believe in those things. And the sooner...
Stephen, you did not disappoint.
Republicans work it out.
You did not disappoint. Thank you so much. And we do want to hear about that 2020. Holly and I are waiting to hear about that 2020. So we might have to wait till next week.
I wonder if you'll get a Guernsey, Stephen.
Yeah.
No chance.
Holly and Stephen, thank you so much for being on the Bolt Report this evening, and we'll see you next week.
Good night.
Thank you.